He didn't introduce himself when he slid into the chair across from Serena Vale's planning table that Tuesday morning in September. He didn't have to. Alessio Vescari simply set a manila envelope on the white linen tablecloth, folded his hands on top of it, and smiled the way a man smiles when he already knows how the story ends. "Your son," he said, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear it above the clatter of the venue's prep crew, "has your eyes. But those cheekbones," he tilted his head slightly, "those belong to someone else entirely, don't they?" Serena's pen stopped moving. Her entire body went still. "I'm going to need you to walk away from this contract," Alessio continued, unhurried, almost gentle. "Pack your things. Get the boy. Leave the state by Thursday. If you don't—" He tapped the envelope once with two fingers. "I'll make sure the right people see what's inside this." She didn't open it. She already knew what was inside it. A photograph. 8 years old. The kind of moment that destroys careers, families, and lives with equal efficiency when it ends up in the wrong hands. Alessio Vescari had been collecting leverage his entire life, and now he was sitting across from her at a wedding planning table, wearing a cream linen suit, using her child as a crowbar. If you have ever been cornered by someone who holds something precious over your head and smiled while doing it, you already know exactly what Serena Vale felt in that moment. The question is, what would you have done? Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment below telling us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about this story starts where you think it does. Serena Vale had not cried at a wedding in 11 years. That was a professional point of pride she held quietly, privately, the way tradespeople hold pride in the invisible details of their work, the stuff clients never notice but that would fall apart immediately without it. She had coordinated 63 weddings since launching Vale Event Design out of a 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago with $1,200 and a borrowed folding table. She had managed monsoon-level rainstorms that materialized 40 minutes before outdoor ceremonies. She had handled a groom who fainted twice at the altar. She had once, memorably, physically intercepted a drunk former fiancé who arrived at a reception in a rented limousine and a wedding dress that was not the bride's. Serena had managed all of it without flinching, without crying, and without losing a single client deposit. The reason she didn't cry at weddings wasn't because she was hard. It was because she had already used up a significant portion of whatever crying she had in her during a single terrible winter 9 years ago, and something in her internal accounting had simply recalibrated after that. Grief, she had discovered, doesn't disappear. It compresses. It becomes a different kind of weight, something you carry without thinking about it until you put it down for a second and suddenly notice how much your shoulders hurt. She was 34 years old. She owned a company worth more than she'd ever imagined when she started it. She had a son who was 8, funny, opinionated about breakfast cereal, and currently costing her approximately 1 gray hair per week. She had a life. It was a good one. It was not the life she had once imagined for herself, but it was hers, and she had built every inch of it with her own hands, which meant she understood its exact dimensions in a way that people who inherit things never quite do. The Hartwell Estate Commission had come through in July, routed through a corporate events firm in Manhattan that handled contracts for clients who preferred layers of insulation between their names and public-facing paperwork. Serena had done enough work at that level to understand the protocol. She asked the questions she was supposed to ask, signed the NDAs she was supposed to sign, and didn't dig deeper than the scope of the work required. The wedding was scheduled for the 3rd weekend of September. The groom was Marcus Vescari, 29, described in the briefing documents as a real estate developer based in Miami. The estate was a privately owned property in the Hudson Valley, 12 acres, a main house that had been built in 1887 and renovated twice since, formal gardens, a glass conservatory that connected the east and west wings, and a reception hall with marble floors and 20-foot coffered ceilings. The budget was obscene. That was the only word for it, the kind of budget that made even experienced vendors call her back within the hour. She drove up on the Monday before the wedding to do her final walkthrough. Noah was with his babysitter, a retired schoolteacher named Glenda, who lived 2 floors down and treated him with the precise combination of firm boundaries and unconditional warmth that Serena herself sometimes struggled to maintain after 10 consecutive hours of vendor negotiations. She'd kissed him goodbye in the hallway, straightened his collar out of habit, even though he was wearing a shirt that had a cartoon dinosaur on it, and there was nothing to straighten, and told him she'd be back Thursday. He told her to bring him a rock. He was going through a geology phase. She'd said yes. The drive up was 2 hours on clear roads. She used the time to review her run-of-show document, listened to exactly 22 minutes of a podcast about sleep science before losing interest, and eat a gas station sandwich that she knew was a mistake even as she was purchasing it. She was fine. She was focused. She was prepared. She was not prepared for what she saw when she walked through the front entrance of the Hartwell estate at 2:17 in the afternoon. The estate's chief of security was briefing a group of plainclothes personnel near the base of the main staircase. Serena had dealt with private security details at high-profile events before. It came with the territory when your clients included the category of person whose names appeared in financial news and whose weddings attracted the wrong kind of attention if the wrong people found out about them. She registered the security presence, noted it, filed it under expected variables, and kept moving toward the ballroom where her team was setting up the first round of floral arrangements. She was scanning her clipboard, walking through the arched doorway that connected the foyer to the main ballroom, when she heard someone speak in a low voice approximately 12 feet to her left. She didn't hear the words clearly. It didn't matter. She would have recognized that voice in a hurricane. Her body stopped before her brain had finished processing what her ears had heard. It was pure reflex, the kind of deep cellular recognition that bypasses conscious thought entirely and lives somewhere below language, in the part of a person that was formed before they knew how to analyze anything. Her pen stopped moving. Her clipboard tilted slightly in her hand. The ambient noise of the room, the florist, the crew laying cable for the lighting rig, someone arguing quietly with someone else near the far window about centerpiece heights, all of it dropped away. She turned her head slowly, the way you turn when you already know what you're going to see and you're bracing for it. Damien Viscari was standing with his back partially toward her, speaking to two men in suits. He was wearing dark clothing, jacket, no tie, the collar open at the throat. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she had simply compressed him in her memory to make him easier to carry. His hair was shorter. There was something different about the way he held himself, a stillness that hadn't been there at 25, a contained quality, like a room where all the windows had been closed and locked from the inside. He hadn't seen her yet. Serena had approximately 4 seconds to make a decision. She could turn around. She could walk back through the arch, find her site coordinator, delegate the ballroom walkthrough, and avoid this completely. She was a professional. She had a contract to execute. She could make a dozen reasonable logistical choices right now that would keep her on the opposite side of this building from him for the next 72 hours. She stood there for all 4 of those seconds. Then one of the men Damien was speaking to shifted his position, and Damien's angle changed, and he turned his head without any particular urgency, and his gaze crossed the room and found her before she had decided anything at all. The thing about seeing someone you once loved, someone you love the specific way you love people when you're young enough to believe that love is sufficient protection against all possible outcomes, is that your face does something before you can stop it. It does something true. Something that lives below the performance layer. Serena had spent 9 years building a very effective performance layer. She was good at it. She deployed it at 63 weddings without a single technical failure. It lasted approximately 1 second under Damien Viscari's direct gaze. He went very still. Not the professional stillness she'd noticed a moment ago. Something different, something older and more involuntary than that. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes didn't move from her face. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. The 12 feet between them felt simultaneously like a hallway and a continent. Then his phone buzzed in his hand, and he looked down at it, and the spell, or whatever it was, she wasn't going to call it a spell. She refused to call it a spell. Cracked. Serena turned and walked back through the arch. She made it to the east corridor before she stopped, set her clipboard against the wall, and stood with her back against the stone for approximately 20 seconds. She breathed. She counted the breaths the way her therapist had shown her 4 years ago when Noah was 4, and the loneliness had gotten to a specific depth that she hadn't expected. She was fine. She was going to be fine. This was a manageable situation. She was a professional who had intercepted a drunk woman in a limousine. She could navigate a building that happened to contain someone she used to love. She picked up her clipboard. She walked to the West Wing. She coordinated the floral installation. She was fine. She was absolutely not fine. By that evening, she had established with some precision what she was dealing with. Marcus Viscari, the groom, was Damien's younger brother. The family name had been right there in the briefing documents, and she had processed it as corporate taxonomy without connecting it to the human being she had spent 3 years loving and 9 years trying to stop thinking about. Because Viscari was not an uncommon name, and she had not let herself consider the possibility, because considering the possibility would have meant thinking about him, and she had very strict internal rules about thinking about him. Her site coordinator, a capable 28-year-old named Priya, found her in the estate kitchen at 7:30, reviewing the catering team's layout proposal, and gave her a look that communicated professional concern. "You look like you're doing math that isn't adding up," Priya said. "I'm always doing math that isn't adding up," Serena said. "That's the job." Priya looked at her for another second, then let it go. She was a good coordinator. Serena called Noah at 8. He answered on the second ring, which meant Glenda had let him stay up past his usual time, and he was trying to hide the evidence by answering quickly. "Did you find any rocks yet?" he asked immediately. "I just got here," she said. "I'll look tomorrow." "There might be limestone up there," he said with the gravity of a small person who had recently read an entire library book about sedimentary deposits. "The Hudson Valley has interesting geology. I'll keep my eyes open." "Mom," he said, and his voice shifted register slightly, the way it did when he was about to say something that he'd been thinking about for a while. "Do you think the wedding is going to be nice?" "I think it's going to be very organized," she said, which was the most honest thing she could say about it right now. "Okay," he said. He sounded satisfied with that. "Glenda made me eat 2 helpings of carrots." "Good." "I didn't want to." "I know. But I ate them." "I know, bud." "Okay," he said again. "Love you." "Love you," she said. "Sleep." She sat in the estate kitchen for a few minutes after she hung up, with the phone in her hand and the sound of the catering crew moving around in the adjacent room. She thought about Damien's face when he'd seen her across the ballroom. The way everything in him had gone quiet and tight, like a fist closing. She thought about the last time she'd seen him, 9 years ago, which was not actually the last time she'd seen him. The last time she'd seen him was across a parking lot in the rain, and she had not spoken to him, and she had driven away. And she had not looked in the rearview mirror because she'd known that if she looked in the rearview mirror, she would not be able to keep driving. She set her phone down and went back to work. The second time she encountered him was the following morning. She was in the conservatory at 7:15 with her tablet and a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm because she'd forgotten to drink it, reviewing the placement of the ceremony chairs, and working out a sightline problem with the floral arch that had bothered her since yesterday. The conservatory connected the east and west wings through a long gallery of iron-framed glass panels, and at that hour the morning light came through at an angle that turned everything slightly golden, and the garden beyond the glass was still damp from overnight rain, and it was genuinely beautiful in a way that she registered clinically because she was working. He appeared at the east end of the conservatory at 7:22 and stopped when he saw her. He looked like he hadn't slept well. She recognized the specific quality of that tiredness, the slightly too controlled posture of someone who has been awake thinking about something they can't stop thinking about. She recognized it because she was wearing the same thing. "Serena," he said. She had been waiting for this since yesterday afternoon. She had a plan. The plan was brief, professional, civil, and short. Establish boundaries through behavior rather than words. Don't explain, don't apologize. Don't ask him to explain or apologize either. Treat it as what it was. 2 people who had a prior personal connection, both present in a professional capacity, committed to conducting themselves accordingly. "Damien," she said, and her voice came out exactly the way she'd intended, which was a small miracle she did not take for granted. He walked toward her at a deliberate pace. He stopped approximately 8 feet away, which was close enough to speak quietly and far enough that it couldn't be read as anything other than a conversation between 2 adults with good manners. "I didn't know you were the planner," he said. "I didn't know your brother was the groom," she said. He absorbed this. Nodded once, slightly, the way he used to nod when he was processing something uncomfortable and trying not to show how uncomfortable it was. "Marcus didn't tell me," he said. My contracts come through a corporate intermediary, she said. The family name was in the paperwork, but I didn't. She stopped. She wasn't going to explain her cognitive process to him. It was a surprise. Yes, he said. His eyes moved over her face in a way that was careful and thorough and not entirely professional, and she made herself hold still under it because looking away would mean something. We have a complicated event to get through, she said, before he could finish that sentence because she genuinely could not afford to hear the end of it. I'd like to do that professionally and without this becoming any more complicated. Can we do that? Something moved behind his eyes. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. We can do that. Good, she said. She looked back at her tablet. I need to resolve a sightline problem. He stood there for another 2 seconds. She could feel it. Then he turned and walked back toward the east wing. She waited until his footsteps faded before she let out a slow breath through her nose. Her hands were steady. She was fairly proud of that. She was still thinking about the way he'd said her name, the specific weight he'd put on it, like it was something he hadn't said out loud in a long time and was testing whether it still meant what it used to mean. She made herself stop thinking about it. She had chairs to rearrange. What happened 2 hours later was not in any version of her run-of-show document. She was in the reception hall with Priya and the lighting director, finessing the placement of the chandelier's dimmer settings, when she heard running footsteps in the corridor, the fast, light, specific percussion of small feet moving at maximum speed. She had 8 years of experience decoding that particular sound pattern, and her body reacted before her mind caught up, turning toward the doorway just as Noah burst through it with the expression he wore when he was chasing something and hadn't yet thought through what happened when he caught it. He had a paper airplane in his hand. The airplane had clearly been launched somewhere in the foyer and had traveled at an optimistic angle into the reception hall, and he had followed it at full speed, and he skidded to a stop on the marble floor in his sneakers, caught himself on a chair, and looked up. The room had several adults in it. Most of them were looking at him. He did what 8-year-olds do when they realize they've run into a room full of adults. He stood up straight and tried to look like he'd meant to do exactly what he'd just done. Glenda brought him, Priya said quietly at Serena's shoulder. She called. Her daughter had a fall. She needed to go. Serena was already moving toward Noah, but she stopped, because Damien had appeared in the doorway from the east corridor at the same moment, and he was looking at Noah, and his face had done something that she had no word for. It wasn't recognition exactly. It was more fundamental than that. It was the look of someone who has just seen something that rearranges the furniture in their chest, quietly, without warning, while they're standing still. Noah looked back at him. The way children look at adults they haven't seen before. Direct, uncomplicated, comprehensive. Taking inventory. Serena watched Damien look at her son. She watched his gaze move from the boy's face, those gray eyes that every school photograph had captured, with a clarity that still sometimes startled her, to his build, to his hands, to his face again. The marble floor was very quiet. Cool house, Noah said to nobody in particular, because he was 8 and silences made him want to fill them. Damien said nothing. He was still looking at the boy's eyes. His own eyes, she knew. The exact same gray. She had known it for 8 years. She had looked at her son's face every day for 8 years, and carried the knowledge of it like a stone in her chest. And now the one person who had never known was standing in the same room looking at the evidence, and the world had tilted slightly on its axis. Damien looked up. His eyes found hers across the room. She held his gaze. She didn't look away. She didn't explain. She didn't have anything to say right now that she could say in this room with the lighting director and her site coordinator and her son standing between them. Damien looked back at Noah once more. Then he turned and walked out of the room without a word. Serena breathed. "Mom," Noah said, appearing at her elbow with the paper airplane. "Do you think marble is igneous or sedimentary?" "Metamorphic," she said automatically. His face lit up. "Seriously?" She put her hand briefly on top of his head. She was shaking, just slightly, beneath the surface of everything. "Seriously," she said. "Come find me a corner to sit in, and I'll tell you about it." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the far end of the hall, narrating something about crystalline structures, and she followed him, and she did not look at the doorway where Damien had been standing. She knew what she had just seen on his face. She knew that by tonight, everything was going to change. She was right about that. She just didn't know yet how many ways it was going to change, or what it was going to cost both of them before it was over. Damien did not go back to his room. He walked the length of the east corridor twice without registering any of it. The framed photographs on the walls, the antique tables with their arrangements of dried flowers, the slight creak in the third floorboard from the landing, all of it invisible to him because his mind was doing something he could not stop and could not quite name. It was running a calculation, the kind that doesn't use numbers. 8 years old. Gray eyes, the specific shape of a jawline he had seen in his own reflection his entire life. He stopped at the end of the corridor where a tall window overlooked the east garden. The garden was still damp from last night's rain. A groundskeeper was moving along the far hedge with a pair of shears, working in the methodical way of someone who does the same thing every week and has stopped thinking about it. Damien watched him without seeing him. His right hand had found the window ledge and was gripping it, not hard, but steadily, the way you hold something when you need to feel that at least one thing in your immediate vicinity is solid and not moving. 9 years. He had not seen Serena Vale in 9 years. He had spent the first 2 of those years actively trying not to look for her, because looking would have required him to admit to himself that he didn't know where she'd gone, and not knowing felt like a particular species of humiliation that he could not afford in those years when the empire was still consolidating and every vulnerability was a door someone was trying to break through. He had spent the next 3 years having other people not find her, discreetly, through channels that couldn't be connected to him, and coming up empty in ways that told him she didn't want to be found. He had spent the last 4 years not thinking about her at all, or something close enough to not thinking about her that it had been functionally sufficient. And now here she was, coordinating linen choices and sightline angles in his brother's wedding venue, looking at him across a marble floor with those dark, still eyes that had always been able to read him in a way that made him feel simultaneously known and exposed, and carrying something she had never once, in any of the discreet inquiries he'd buried under layers of deniability over the years, allowed anyone to find. A son, 8 years old. He pushed off the window ledge and walked. He needed information. He always needed information. It was the only thing that had ever reliably steadied him when the ground shifted. Not feelings, not certainty, not the comfort of believing he was right, but actual documented fact. He found his head of personal security, a compact, efficient man named Reyes, who had been with him for 6 years and understood without being told what categories of request required no written record in the small study off the main library that Reyes had converted into a temporary operations room. "I need a background pull," Damien said. He gave Serena's name, her company name, the city she apparently operated from. Everything he'd registered in the briefing materials he'd skimmed without real attention 2 weeks ago because his brother's wedding logistics had not seemed like something that required his personal scrutiny. Everything, financial records, residential history, anyone she's been associated with. And the child. He paused. The boy, 8 years old. I need his full record. Reyes wrote nothing down. He never wrote anything down. Timeline? Reyes asked. Tonight, Damien said. Earlier if you can manage it. Reyes nodded once and reached for his phone. Damien left the study and went to find his brother. Marcus was in the east parlor with his fiancée, Claudette, reviewing a seating chart that had clearly already caused some kind of disagreement because they were sitting on opposite ends of the settee with a mutual distance that communicated the aftermath of an argument more clearly than anything they could have said. Marcus looked up when Damien came in, and his expression shifted to the particular mix of warmth and wariness that it always did when Damien appeared unexpectedly, because in their family, unexpected appearances by Damien had historically meant that something required attention. "We need to talk," Damien said. Claudette, who was practical and had learned over 8 months of engagement exactly which moments were family business and which were hers, rose without comment, kissed Marcus briefly on the cheek, and took the seating chart with her. When the door closed, Marcus said, "If you're here to tell me about a security concern, can it wait until after dinner? We've had 3 catering changes this week, and Claudette is at a very specific emotional limit." "You didn't tell me who was running this wedding," Damien said. Marcus looked at him. "The planning company?" "The planner." A beat. Damien watched his brother's face for the specific thing he was looking for, and he found it. A slight, barely there hesitation that lasted less than a second. The hesitation of someone who had known and had chosen not to mention it. "Marcus," Damien said very quietly, It's been 9 years, Marcus said. You knew. The firm recommended her. She's the best in the region for this kind of event, and Uncle Alessio approved the budget, and I thought— Marcus stopped. I thought you'd want to know she was doing well. I thought maybe seeing her would— You thought, Damien said. The two words landed like stones. Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. He was 29 and still had the quality of wanting people around him to be okay. Not in a weak way, but in the way of someone who had grown up watching what happened when the people around him were not okay, and had decided very early that he would orient himself toward the other direction. It was, Damien had always thought, the best thing about his brother, and also the thing that occasionally made him difficult. Does she have a son? Damien asked. Something changed in Marcus's expression. Not surprised, not quite. I didn't— He stopped. The firm handles the client paperwork. I don't have her personal— Marcus. Damien let the silence do the rest. His brother looked at him for a long moment. The radiator in the corner of the parlor ticked steadily. Outside, a bird moved through the garden hedge with a sound like a single word being swallowed. I've seen her photo in trade publications, Marcus said finally. She has a son. I don't know anything about him. Damien nodded. He picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair where he'd set it and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He had learned, over many years, that the most effective thing anger could do was stay quiet. Serena found out that he'd been asking about her at 4 p.m. when one of her vendor contacts, a florist named Dara, who had worked 3 of her previous events and had the specific social radar of someone who spent their professional life reading rooms, pulled her aside in the corridor near the service entrance and said, in a low, careful voice, "Someone from the family's security team asked my assistant about you this morning, just so you know." Serena kept her face neutral. What kind of questions? Background questions, Dara said. How long you'd been in the industry, who your clients were, whether you'd worked any Viscari-adjacent events before. She paused. Whether you came alone. Serena was quiet for a moment. She was aware of the sound of her own breathing, the slight tightness across her chest, that she recognized as the beginning of a panic response, and that she was not going to allow to become one. Thank you, she said. I appreciate you telling me. Dara looked at her with the expression of someone who wants to ask a question they've already decided not to ask. Then she went back to her flowers. Serena found a bathroom. She ran cold water over her wrists, an old trick, something that actually worked, she didn't know why, and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like someone trying to look calm. She needed to look actually calm, which was a different thing. He was having her investigated. Of course he was. Damien Viscari had not survived a decade at the center of one of the country's most dangerous criminal organizations by taking coincidences at face value. She had walked into his brother's wedding, and he had seen her face, and then he had seen Noah, and now he was doing what Damien Viscari did, which was collect information until the shape of the truth emerged from it. The question was what shape he thought he was looking for. She dried her hands and went back to work, because the work was the only thing right now that she had complete control over. At 6 p.m., 3 things happened in close enough sequence that she would later think of them as a single event. First, Priya came to find her with a look that meant something unexpected had surfaced. 2 of the catering staff, Priya said, the ones who arrived with the Hartfield crew this afternoon. Their credentials don't match the company's roster. I called the catering manager and they have no record of those 2 being assigned to this event. Serena set down her tablet. Where are they now? Near the reception hall. Moving equipment. Keep them in your sight. Don't let them know you've noticed. She was already moving toward the hall. Call Reyes. Second, she found Reyes on her own, faster than she'd expected, because he was already in the corridor outside the reception hall, looking at something on his phone with the particular focused immobility of someone who has just received information that has changed the shape of their afternoon. When she reached him, he looked up and she said, 2 catering staff with false credentials. Southeast corner of the hall, and he said, I know, we're handling it. And there was a quality to his voice that told her this was not news to him, that something larger was already in motion, that she had walked into the edge of a situation she did not have the full map of. Third, she turned from Reyes and walked directly into Damien. He was coming from the library corridor. He stopped when they nearly collided, and they were close, too close for the careful distance they'd both been maintaining since morning. She could see the exact line of tension in his jaw, the careful, controlled nothing of his expression that she had once learned to read as fluently as her own handwriting and had since tried to forget. The catering staff, she said, because it was the most pressing thing, and also because it was safer than anything else she might have said. Taken care of, he said. Who are they? Not caterers. Damien. She used his name the way he'd used hers that morning. Not carelessly, not easily, but with the weight of something that had been put down and carefully picked back up. Who are they? He looked at her for a moment that was half a second longer than necessary. Then he said, hired surveillance, low level. They're not the actual threat. Then what is? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved to the corridor behind her, scanning, the way he always used to scan, the way she'd once thought was a nervous habit before she'd understood it was something else entirely. Then they came back to her. When did you know about the boy? He said. The air in the corridor shifted. Serena had known this was coming. She had known it since the marble floor that morning, since the look on his face when Noah's gray eyes had found him across the room. She had spent 8 years preparing what she would say if she ever had to have this conversation, and now that it was here, she found that everything she'd prepared was insufficient in ways she hadn't anticipated. When I was 3 months along, she said, which was after you made your position very clear. Something crossed his face. What position? The letter, she said. The men who came to my apartment. The account that appeared in my bank, which I never touched, by the way, not once. You can have your people verify that. I don't know what letter, he said. His voice was very quiet, very flat. The kind of flat that wasn't empty. It was the flat of something being pressed down very hard from the inside. She looked at him. Damien, I never sent anyone to your apartment, he said. I never had a letter sent. I looked for you for 2 years. The corridor was very still. Down at the far end, she could hear Priya's voice on the phone, giving instructions to someone about the displaced catering staff. She could hear the ordinary sounds of a venue in preparation. Someone carrying something heavy through the service entrance, a radio playing somewhere in the kitchen, the creak of the old building making the adjustments it made at this hour as the temperature shifted. She heard all of it, and she was standing very still in the middle of it, and she was looking at Damien's face, and she was trying to find the lie in it. She couldn't find it. That was the thing about Damien, the thing she had always known, and that had made loving him as complicated as it had been. He was capable of extraordinary deception in the context of his professional life, but when something hit the specific register of personal truth, his face did something he couldn't fully control. She had learned that register years ago. She recognized it now. He believed what he was saying. The letter had your signature, she said. Her voice came out lower than she intended. And your seal, the family seal. Which family seal? His eyes sharpened. The security seal, the one you used for internal directives. He went absolutely still. And then something moved through his expression that was too fast and too complex for her to fully decode. Recognition, anger, and something underneath both of those things that looked almost like nausea. Who else had access to that seal, she said. She already felt the shape of the answer before he said it. He didn't answer. He turned away from her and his right hand found the wall, and he stood there for a moment with his back to her, which was something she had never seen Damien Viscari do. He never turned his back on anything. He always faced it. Damien, I need you to take the boy, he said, his voice coming out slightly rough at the edges, controlled but rough. And I need you to move him to the North Wing guest suite, right now. Don't tell him why. Keep Priya with you. Don't go anywhere in this building alone tonight. The bottom of her stomach dropped. What's happening? He turned back. His eyes were dark and very direct, and she recognized the look. It was the look of someone who is in the middle of understanding something terrible and moving forward through the understanding rather than stopping in it. I think the wedding isn't the target, he said. She had already thought this. She had thought it since Priya had mentioned the false credentials. But hearing it from him, with the specific gravity that he said it with, made it real in a different way. I'm the target, he said, and I think this whole event was arranged to put me in one place long enough to do it cleanly. She looked at him. Arranged by whom? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She watched his face close around the answer like a door shutting, and she understood that whatever he knew or suspected was something he was not going to hand her in a corridor without understanding the full dimensions of it first. Go get Noah, he said. Please. She had not heard him say please in 9 years. It was almost worse than everything else. She went. Noah was in the north parlor where Glenda, who had apparently recovered enough from her daughter's situation to return by early afternoon, had set him up with a glass of juice and the geology book he'd brought in his backpack. He looked up when Serena came in with the particular expression he wore when he could read in her face that something was happening and he was deciding how worried to be. "We're moving rooms," she said. She kept her voice the specific even temperature she used when she needed him to not panic. "The estate has better light in the north wing for the work I need to do tonight." He considered this. 8-year-olds, in Serena's experience, have a remarkably accurate internal lie detector when it comes to their parents. But Noah had also learned, through some combination of her example and his own temperament, to process information before reacting to it. "Can I bring my book?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "And the juice?" "Bring the juice." He got up, collected his things with the unhurried efficiency of a child who has moved through a lot of spaces with his mother and understands that packing quickly is a useful skill. Serena helped Glenda gather the rest of his things, and they moved through the corridor toward the north wing, and she kept her pace even and her expression manageable. And she did not look at the shadows in the archways or the service doors along the corridor or think about who might be behind them. She got Noah settled. She left Glenda with instructions to keep the door locked and to call her immediately if anything felt wrong. Noah looked at her from the bed with the geology book open on his lap and said, "Mom, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," she said. "You're doing the face," he said. "What face?" "The face where everything is fine, but you're also thinking about 7 other things." She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at her son. The gray eyes that were not hers, the jawline that was not hers, the particular quality of stillness that she had attributed to her own nurture for 8 years, and that she was now reinterpreting with a different kind of clarity. "I need you to stay in this room tonight," she said. "Even if it seems boring, especially if it seems boring." He nodded. He accepted this. "Noah," she said. She didn't know why she said his name like that. She just needed to say it. "Yeah? You did good today," she said, with the metamorphic marble question. He grinned. It was Damien's grin. She had known that since the first time it appeared on her son's face, 8 months old. She had been unprepared for it. She had sat down on the kitchen floor of her apartment and cried for 20 minutes. "I know," he said. "I read ahead in the book." She kissed his forehead. She stood up. She went back out. Damien was waiting in the north wing corridor. He had Reyes with him and a second person she didn't recognize, a woman, early 30s, plainclothes, carrying a tablet. "The DNA test," he said when she reached him. She stopped. "I'm not asking you," he said. "I'm telling you. I need to know for certain." He looked at her with the same directness he'd used in the corridor downstairs. Not aggressive, not accusatory, something rawer than that. "A hair. From the boy's pillow, that's all." She stood there for a moment. There was an argument she could have made, about consent, about her rights, about the 9 years in which he had not been present for a single fever or school play or nightmare that woke Noah up at 2 a.m. She could have made that argument at considerable length and with considerable justification. Instead, she turned back to the guest suite door, opened it quietly, slipped inside, and came back 30 seconds later with a single dark hair pinched between her thumb and index finger. She held it out to him. He took it carefully. He handed it to the woman with the tablet without looking away from Serena's face. "How long?" she said. 6 hours, the woman said. "Possibly 4. Damien said nothing. I was still looking at Serena with that expression she couldn't entirely decode, the one that had too many layers operating at once, grief and anger, and something that was working very hard to remain something other than what it actually was. "You said you looked for me," she said. "For 2 years." "Yes." "And you didn't find anything?" "Nothing," he said. "Every trace was clean, like you'd never—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. Like someone very experienced had managed the erasure. "The letter told me you'd arranged my death," she said. She said it plainly, the way you say something that has calcified inside you over years until it no longer has the power to make you cry, only the power to state itself. "It said if I contacted you, or came back, or told anyone about the baby, that you would—" She stopped. It said the instruction had already been given to someone. That it was a matter of when, not if. Damien looked like he'd been struck. Not physically. It was an internal thing, something she could see moving through the muscles of his face and the set of his shoulders. "I ran," she said. "I want you to understand that. I didn't run because I stopped caring. I ran because I believed every word of it, and I had a child to protect, and I made the only calculation I could with the information I had." The corridor was quiet. "I know," he said. The two words came out unsteady in a way that she had never, in 3 years of knowing him, heard his voice be unsteady. "I know." From somewhere in the south wing of the estate there was a sound. It was small, a single sharp crack, like a door closing too hard, or a piece of equipment falling, or something else entirely. Reyes heard it at the same moment Damien did. Both of them went still in the specific simultaneous way of people who have spent years training themselves to read sounds for meaning. Reyes was already moving toward the south corridor, his hand at his jacket. Damien stepped closer to Serena, not in front of her, not protectively, just close. The way you position yourself when you are recalculating the geometry of a room and need to know where the important things are. "Stay here," he said. "Don't tell me," she started. "Serena." He looked at her, just for a second. "Please." She stopped. He went. She stood in the corridor with the closed door of her son's room at her back and the sound of retreating footsteps ahead of her, and she counted her breaths, and she thought about the letter she'd burned in the sink of her first apartment in Cincinnati 9 years ago, the one written on stationery with the Viscari family seal pressed into the bottom corner, the one that had told her the man she loved had signed her death warrant to protect his empire, the one she had believed because it had been detailed and specific and had arrived with two men standing at her door who knew things that only someone inside Damien's organization could have known. The family seal. The one only two people could access. She was still thinking about that when the lights in the north wing went out. All of them. At once. The entire corridor went dark. Not dim, not flickering, but the complete immediate dark of a deliberate power cut. And from somewhere below her, deep in the belly of the estate, she heard the sound of something that was not a door and not equipment. It was the sound of a building beginning to move toward a kind of violence that would not wait for morning. The darkness was total for exactly 4 seconds. Serena counted them. Not deliberately. Her mind did it automatically, the way it had learned to do in the years of raising a child alone, when counting seconds was how you measured the distance between the sound of a fall and the sound of crying, between the moment you heard something wrong and the moment you understood what it was. 4 seconds of complete black, and then the emergency lighting came on. Low, amber, battery-powered strips along the baseboards of the north wing corridor that turned everything the color of an old photograph. She didn't move toward her son's door. She moved toward it. The door was still locked from inside. She knocked twice, the specific pattern she'd established with Glenda years ago, for situations that required calm over urgency. Glenda's voice came through the door immediately. "We're here." "Stay locked," Serena said. Don't open for anyone except me. Use the pattern." "Understood." Noah's voice behind Glenda's. "Mom, what happened to the lights?" "Generator maintenance," she said. The lie came out clean. "Old building. I'll be back in 10 minutes." She didn't wait to hear his response. She turned and moved down the corridor toward the sound she'd heard before the lights went out, keeping her back to the wall and her footsteps as quiet as the old floorboards allowed. The amber emergency strips gave her enough to navigate by, but turned every shadow into something ambiguous. A door at the far end of the corridor stood open 3 inches. She was certain it had been closed before. She pushed it open with her elbow and stepped through into the upper service stairwell. Below her, 2 floors down, she could hear voices. Not words, just the low, controlled register of men who were not panicking, but were also not doing anything as ordinary as maintenance. She moved down the first flight, stopped at the landing, listened. One voice she recognized as Reyes, the other one she didn't. Then a third voice, older and unhurried, with the particular quality of someone who has planned for all available outcomes and is therefore not required to raise his voice. Her hand found the stairwell railing. She gripped it. She knew that voice. She knew it from a Tuesday morning at a white linen table when a man in a cream suit had set a manila envelope in front of her and told her to leave the state by Thursday. She knew it from the cold, measured cadence of a person who had been performing patience so long that it had become indistinguishable from genuine tranquility. Alessio Vescari was in the building. She descended the second flight with more care than the first, testing each step before committing her weight, keeping close to the inner wall where the boards were less likely to shift. At the base of the stairs, she stopped in the shadow of the doorframe and looked through the gap. The ground floor service corridor was lit by the same amber emergency strips as the floor above. Reyes was standing with his back partially toward her, his posture the careful neutral of someone managing a situation they are not certain they are in control of. Beside him, one of the other security personnel, a younger man she'd seen earlier near the reception hall, had his hand at his side in a way that was too studied to be relaxed. Alessio stood at the far end of the corridor, 6 feet from the service exit door. I was wearing the same cream linen suit from Tuesday. She registered that detail and found it strange in a way she couldn't immediately explain. And he was holding a phone loosely at his side, and he was looking at Reyes with the expression of someone who is not the least bit concerned about the outcome of the conversation because they have already decided what it will be. "Where is he?" Reyes said. "He's managing something," Alessio said pleasantly. "He'll be along. These things take a few minutes to sort out when you do them properly." "What things?" Reyes said. It wasn't a question. It was the particular flat statement of a person who already knows the answer and is giving the other person one opportunity to say it themselves. Alessio smiled. It was the exact same smile from Tuesday. Patient and certain and vaguely indulgent, the smile of someone who finds other people's tension mildly entertaining because it confirms that they are operating from incomplete information. "The real question," Alessio said, "is whether Damien is currently in the north wing or the east corridor. I've had some conflicting reports in the last few minutes." Serena's chest went cold. He wasn't here for the security team. He was here because he didn't know precisely where Damien was. And he was using Reyes, using this conversation, the power cut, the chaos of the last 30 minutes, to locate him. She was already pulling back from the doorframe when Alessio's gaze, moving in a slow, unhurried scan of the corridor, past the gap in the door, stopped. She pressed herself flat against the wall in the stairwell. Her heart was doing something loud and mechanical in her chest. She heard Alessio say, very calmly, "Check the stairwell." She moved. She went up rather than down. Up was counterintuitive. Up was away from the exits, but down meant walking past that door, and she was not going to walk past that door. She went up the second flight and through the door at the top and into the first corridor she reached, which was the east-west connecting passage above the main library. She moved fast and quiet through the amber-lit dark, counting doors, trying to rebuild the estate's layout in her mind from the walkthrough she'd done on Monday, which felt like it had happened in a different country to a person with a simpler life. She needed to find Damien. She needed to find him before Alessio did, which meant she needed to know where he was, which meant she pulled out her phone. The screen lit up in the dark. She had Priya's number and 3 vendor contacts and the estate's internal coordinator. She did not have Damien's number because she had not had Damien's number for 9 years. And she had not asked for it today because asking for it had felt like a different kind of surrender than the one she was currently in the middle of executing. She texted Priya, "Where is D? Right now. Emergency." She kept moving while she waited. 40 seconds. Priya's response appeared. "East wing. Second floor study." Reyes just radioed him. Why? She was already heading for the east wing. The connecting corridor between the library passage and the east wing ran through a short gallery that, in daylight, housed a collection of landscape paintings and a pair of uncomfortable benches. In the amber emergency lighting, it was a tunnel of shifting orange shadow, and Serena moved through it at the speed of someone who has made a decision and is not reconsidering it. She emerged into the east wing stairwell, went up, opened the door to the second floor, and saw Damien at the far end of the hall. He was not alone. He had 2 of his security personnel with him, and he was on his phone, and he turned when he heard her come through the door, with the expression of a person who was not expecting her to be the thing that came through that door. She covered the distance between them fast. She didn't stop until she was close enough that she didn't need to raise her voice. "Alessio is in the building," she said. "He's in the ground floor service corridor. He was asking Reyes where you were." Damien went very still. "He has the same calm he always has," she said. "The kind that means everything is already in motion." She watched his face. How many people does he have access to in this building right now? How do you know about his calm? Damien said. He came to see me, she said, Tuesday morning, before I came up here. He told me to leave the state by Thursday. The stillness in Damien's face became something different, something that was operating below the surface at a pressure that hadn't been visible before. One of the security personnel near the wall shifted his weight slightly. The second one looked at Damien. He knew you were the planner, Damien said. Not a question. He set up the meeting himself, she said. He told me the firm had recommended me. I assumed... She stopped. I assumed it was coincidental. I know how that sounds. It doesn't sound like anything, Damien said. His voice was controlled, but there were edges to it now. He chose you specifically. He needed someone who would pull me into this building and keep me here. And he needed the choice to feel legitimate enough that I wouldn't question it. He used me as bait, she said. He used you as architecture, Damien said. There's a difference. Bait is something you know about. Architecture is invisible. His jaw moved. He knew I'd see you. He knew what I'd do when I saw you. Which was what? He looked at her. It was a brief look, direct and complicated and not entirely comfortable to be on the receiving end of. Stay, he said simply. She heard it for what it was and didn't respond to it. The DNA result came in 20 minutes ago, he said. She waited. I knew before it came in, he said. I knew in the ballroom. He looked at something past her shoulder for a moment, something that wasn't in the physical room. Then he looked back. 99.9. The report came with a flag note from the analyst. He said the sample was clean, no contamination, no ambiguity. She absorbed this. She had known what it would say. She had handed him the hair knowing what it would say. But hearing it stated in that particular flat, certain tones still did something to the architecture of the moment that she hadn't fully prepared for. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, with a slight inflection that wasn't mockery, but wasn't quite neutrality either. I have a son I didn't know existed until this morning. My uncle has been running an operation inside my own organization for what appears to be at least 9 years, and the building we're currently in has... He glanced at the security personnel. How many? 11 confirmed, the man near the wall said. We think 3 are unlocated. 11 of his people inside the estate, Damien said to Serena, and whatever he has positioned outside. The catering crew from this afternoon, she said. The 2 with false credentials. Are they still contained? No, Reyes said, appearing at the end of the corridor. He was slightly winded. There was something on his left sleeve that in the amber light looked dark. They're not. Damien looked at him. Where were you? Service corridor, ground floor. Reyes's voice was the voice of a man reporting something he does not fully understand yet. Your uncle was there. I know, Damien said. What happened? He talked to me, Reyes said. He was very calm. He told me you'd asked him to handle the internal security coordination for this event, that you'd brought him in specifically to manage the complications with the original contractor. He stopped. He looked at Damien with an expression that was working hard to be professional and was not entirely succeeding. He showed me the authorization document. It had your signature, the security seal, the current one, the updated seal from March. The hallway went quiet. Damien said nothing. His face had done the thing she'd seen earlier in the downstairs corridor, the thing where too many layers moved at once, and none of them quite reached the surface. He has the current seal, Serena said. He has everything, Damien said, very quietly. He's been inside every level of the organization, for years. He stopped. While I was running it. It was the first thing he'd said that cracked slightly. Just slightly. The way old wood cracks. Not breaking, but showing the line of where the break would be if the pressure continued long enough. He arranged the wedding, Serena said. You said that in the corridor. Marcus told me the venue was Uncle Alessio's suggestion, Damien said. The estate, the timing, all of it. I thought he was doing Marcus a favor. He does that. He's always done that. Appeared generous, appeared to be managing things on the family's behalf. His hands were at his sides. Still. He was positioning every element, the estate's layout, the guest list, the catering contractor, the planner. He looked at her again. You. And Noah, she said. His jaw tightened. He knew about Noah, she said. Before today. He said, He said my son had my eyes but different cheekbones. He'd seen him. He knew who he was. He's been watching the boy, Damien said. It came out with a specific roughness that she recognized as the sound of someone holding something terrible at arm's length with considerable effort. Since you left. She thought about that. She thought about 8 years of carefully constructed anonymity. The apartment that wasn't in her name for the first 2 years, the steady erosion of that caution as time passed and nothing came. And she started to believe that the letter's threats had been conditional rather than inevitable. She thought about Noah in the park on Saturday mornings, which was their consistent routine, which had been their consistent routine since he was old enough to walk. She thought about whether there had been someone in that park she'd never registered as a threat because they'd looked like an ordinary person watching the world go by. He told me to leave by Thursday, she said. He had the envelope, the photograph. She looked at Damien. Whatever was in it was supposed to make me run, the same way I ran 9 years ago. But you didn't run, Damien said. No, she said. Why not? She looked at him directly. Because the last time I ran based on evidence someone else put in front of me, I spent 9 years wrong about the most important thing I'd ever been wrong about. The hallway was quiet, except for the low hum of the emergency power system somewhere in the building structure. Reyes said carefully, "We need to move. If he's positioned 11 people inside and has coverage outside, he's moving toward whatever the endpoint is. We're not going to want to be stationary when he gets there." "Where's Marcus?" Damien said. Reyes's expression shifted in a way that was very small and very specific. "That's the other thing," he said. Damien looked at him. "Your brother went to find your uncle 40 minutes ago," Reyes said. "He said he wanted to talk to him about the security situation, the catering staff." He paused. "He hasn't come back." The quiet in the hallway changed register entirely. Serena watched Damien's face go through something that moved too fast for her to follow completely. Fear, calculation, something that wasn't quite either of those things, but lived between them in the specific territory of someone who loves a person and is in the process of understanding that love does not guarantee anything about outcomes. "Where did he go?" Damien said. "South Wing," Reyes said. "The receiving room off the garden corridor." "That's at the other end of the building from where Alessio was standing 20 minutes ago," Serena said. "Yes," Reyes said. "Which means either Marcus went to him and Alessio moved," she said, "or Marcus went to him and Alessio sent someone else to manage the service corridor conversation." "The second one," Damien said. "I was already moving. The service corridor was theater. He wanted Serena to see him, hear him, report back to me. I was setting the direction." He looked at Reyes. "He wanted me moving toward the east wing." "Away from the south," Reyes said. "Away from Marcus." They moved. The route from the east wing second floor to the south wing receiving room required them to pass through either the main ballroom corridor on the ground floor or the connecting gallery on the first. Damien chose the first floor gallery, which was longer but offered more cover and fewer choke points. They moved in a group: Damien, Reyes, the 2 security personnel, and Serena, who had not been asked to come and had not offered to stay behind. Nobody mentioned it. The gallery was dark except for the amber baseboards, and the landscape paintings on the walls watched them pass with the indifferent patience of objects that have survived more than one kind of disaster in an old house. They reached the south wing crossing at the top of the service stairs. Reyes held up a hand. They stopped. From somewhere below, not directly below, somewhere at a diagonal, through walls and flooring and the old building's complex acoustic geometry, there were voices. Damien went down the stairs first, Reyes second. Serena counted to 3 and followed. The receiving room off the garden corridor was a ground floor space that opened onto the estate's rear garden through a pair of glass doors. In the amber emergency lighting, the garden beyond the glass was entirely dark, but the receiving room itself had a secondary power source. A single floor lamp in the far corner was still burning, running on what had to be a separate circuit, casting a warm, ordinary light over an ordinary arrangement of furniture and the 2 people in it. Marcus was sitting on the receiving room sofa. I was sitting very straight, which was not how Marcus typically sat. His hands were on his knees. He was looking at something across the room with the expression of a person who has been in a conversation for long enough that they have moved through shock and out the other side into a kind of terrible clarity. Claudette was beside him. Her hand was in his. She was looking at Marcus rather than at anything else, which Serena registered as either remarkable love or remarkable compartmentalization, and possibly both. Alessio was standing near the garden doors with his phone in his hand and his suit jacket still immaculate and his expression completely unchanged from the service corridor, from Tuesday morning, from every other moment he had occupied with the patient certainty of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and is watching it happen now. "There he is," Alessio said when Damien came through the doorway. His voice carried the warmth of someone greeting a family member at a long-anticipated gathering. "I was starting to wonder which route you'd take." Damien didn't stop inside the doorway. He walked into the room at a steady pace, and Serena came through behind him, and Reyes positioned himself at the door. "Marcus," Damien said, "are you hurt?" "No," Marcus said. His voice was flat in a specific way, the flatness of someone who has been told something they cannot yet incorporate. "He's fine," Alessio said. "We've been having a conversation, a long overdue one, honestly. I've been trying to find the right moment for it for several years, and it seems this is what the right moment looks like." He looked at Damien. "Your planner is here. Interesting choice, bringing her." "Where are the people you put in this building?" Damien said. "Distributed," Alessio said pleasantly. "Don't concern yourself with the logistics." 11 inside, Damien said. "What's outside?" Alessio smiled. "More." "How long have you been running operations under my name?" Damien said. The smile didn't change. "Your father's name originally, then yours." He tilted his head slightly. 17 years, give or take. It started well before you took over, Damien. You inherited the business, and I had already been running half of it for nearly a decade. I simply continued. "Using my seal," Damien said. "I've had access to every security credential the organization has used since before your father's death," Alessio said. "He trusted me implicitly. You trusted me because he trusted me. That's how family works, isn't it? Trust moves through the bloodline like water through rock, slowly, invisibly." "The letter," Damien said. 9 years ago. You sent it." Something almost imperceptible moved in Alessio's expression. A slight adjustment. The first one she'd seen. "I sent several letters," he said. "You'll have to be more specific." "The one you sent Serena," Damien said. His voice was entirely controlled, every word delivered at exactly the same pressure. "The one with my seal that told her I'd ordered her death." The room was very quiet. Alessio looked at Serena for a moment with an expression that was not quite apologetic and not quite indifferent, but occupied the space between those things. "That was necessary," he said. "Not personal. I want to be clear about that." "Necessary," Serena said. The word came out of her mouth with a texture she hadn't intended. Something rough and slightly jagged, like something that had been worn smooth being turned over to reveal the edge it had always had. "You were going to have his child," Alessio said, with the air of someone explaining something self-evident. "A legitimate heir. One born from an actual relationship rather than an arrangement. One who would grow up knowing both of his parents and would have a specific kind of claim. Not legal, not formal, but the kind that matters inside an organization like ours. On Damien's loyalty and by extension his decisions." He paused. "I couldn't allow that." "Because of the inheritance," Damien said. "Because of the control," Alessio said. "Inheritance is about money. Control is about who the family follows when decisions are made. Your father followed me because he believed I was indispensable. You followed me because you'd never been given a reason not to. A child? A son, as it turns out, with your face and your temperament from everything I've observed. A son like that, one you raised and loved and made decisions around, would have changed the gravity of the entire organization." He looked at Damien steadily. "You would have made different choices, safer ones. You would have moved away from the highest risk operations because you had something you couldn't afford to lose." He said it the way someone says something that is obviously true and therefore requires no apology. "The organization needed you hungry, Damien. Fear keeps you hungry. Love makes you cautious," Marcus said, from the sofa, without looking up. "How long have you known about the boy?" "Since before he was born," Alessio said. "I had someone with your mother for the first 6 months in Cincinnati. I needed to know she'd actually left and wasn't going to reconsider." "And after that," Damien said. "Periodically," Alessio said. "The boy is remarkable, by the way, genuinely. I don't say that to be cruel. I mean it as an observation. He has your focus. That particular quality you have of looking at something until you understand it completely. I've watched him in the park on— Stop talking about my son, Damien said. The controlled surface of his voice cracked along a single line. Just one. Just for a second. Don't say another word about him. Alessio stopped. He looked at Damien with something that was astonishingly, almost respectful. There it is, he said softly. That's precisely what I was describing. From outside the garden doors a light appeared. Then another. Then three more. The cold, functional white of tactical flashlights moving through the dark garden toward the receiving room. Reyes said very quietly, from the doorway, Damien. Damien didn't look away from his uncle. Serena looked at the lights moving through the garden and counted them, and did the only calculation that mattered. The glass doors between the receiving room and the garden had a standard estate lock, the kind that would hold for approximately 40 seconds against someone who intended to come through them. The service corridor behind Reyes was their exit route. The distance from here to the north wing, where Noah was locked in a room with Glenda, was 2 floors up, and the length of the building, which in an estate this size was roughly 400 feet of corridors, she'd spent 3 days learning. She knew this building better than any person in this room, except possibly the man who had arranged for them all to be in it. Damien, she said. He looked at her. The service stairs behind Reyes connect to the kitchen corridor, she said. The kitchen corridor has a secondary access to the maintenance passage under the east wing. I found it on Monday during the walkthrough because it was a liability for catering traffic and I needed to reroute the— She stopped. It runs the length of the building below the ground floor. It exits at the north garden. He was listening. I can get Marcus and Claudette out, she said, and I can get to Noah. She held his gaze. But I need 3 minutes. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. The lights in the garden were now at the glass doors. Something metal touched the outside lock. Reyes, Damien said. I'll go with her, Reyes said. No, Damien said. I need you here. He looked at the second security personnel, the younger one, the one she'd seen outside the reception hall. Novak, go. The young man nodded. Damien looked back at Serena. There was something in his face that she didn't have a word for in any language she'd ever spoken. Something that was both a question and an answer and an acknowledgement of a debt that would take longer than 3 minutes to address. Go, he said. She went, and Marcus came off the sofa without being told, pulling Claudette with him, and Novak held the door, and Serena moved through it into the dark corridor with the floor plan of the Hartwell estate laid out inside her head like a map she'd been drawing for 3 days without knowing she would need it tonight. And behind her she heard the garden doors come open with a sound like something being forced that wasn't meant to be forced, and she did not look back, and she ran. The maintenance passage beneath the east wing was not a place anyone had designed for urgency. It was low-ceilinged and narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, with stone walls that had been here since 1887 and intended for nothing more dramatic than the movement of coal and pipe access and the quiet infrastructure of a house that wanted its working parts invisible. Serena had found it Monday afternoon as a problem to be solved. The catering traffic flow had a bottleneck at the kitchen junction, and she'd gone looking for an alternate route and found the passage behind a utility door that opened with a key left hanging in the lock. The way keys are left in locks in old houses, where the original security concern was keeping the cold out rather than keeping people in. She had noted it. She had moved on. She had spent 3 days being good at her job without knowing her job was scaffolding for something else entirely. Now she moved through it at a pace that was as fast as the ceiling allowed, which was not fast enough, which was what it was. Novak was behind her. Marcus was behind Novak. Claudette was at the back, and to her considerable credit, she had not made a single sound since the receiving room. Not a question, not a complaint, just the steady percussion of her heels hitting stone, which was actually somewhat loud, but there was nothing to be done about it. The passage ran approximately 200 feet east before it branched. Left was the basement storage. Right was the continuation toward the north foundation exit. Serena went right without slowing down. She had her phone in her hand with the screen at minimum brightness, using it as a directed light source, keeping it low. The amber emergency strips didn't reach this level. Down here it was the phone or nothing. How far? Mark said, behind Novak. His voice was controlled. Tight, but controlled. He had his brother's quality of compressing things. 80 feet, she said. Maybe 90. There's a stone step up about 40 feet ahead. Don't miss it. What's outside the exit, Novak said. North Garden. It runs along the property wall. If Alessio's people are positioned at the main gates and the south garden, the north wall is the longest route but the least covered. She paused. That's an assumption based on logistics. I could be wrong. If you're wrong, Novak said, then we deal with that when we get there, she said. She felt the step under her foot at 38 feet and said step without turning and heard the chain of it move back through the group behind her. 40 feet later, the passage made a slight turn and she could smell the difference in the air. The cold, damp, living smell of outside versus the closed mineral smell of the passage. The exit was a low wooden door with a horizontal iron bar across it, the old-fashioned kind that lifts rather than turns. She lifted it as quietly as she could. The door swung outward with a sound that was inevitably a sound, the long exhalation of hinges that hadn't moved in months, and the night air came in cold and immediate and real. She looked out. The north garden was dark. The property wall was a pale line 20 feet ahead, fieldstone, maybe 8 feet high. No flashlight beams in this section, no voices. She stepped out, turned back. Marcus, then Claudette. Novak stays at the door until you're both out. Marcus came through first and stood upright in the cold air with the expression of a man in the first 30 seconds after surfacing from deep water. The recalibration of the senses, the reassessment of where things are. Claudette came out second and grabbed his arm immediately, and he covered her hand with his without looking at her, which was the most real thing Serena had seen from him all evening. The north wing entrance, Serena said. From here it's along the wall, then the side entrance on the east corner of the building. I need you to get there and stay there. She looked at Novak. Can you get them to that entrance and hold it? Yes, Novak said. Noah is on the second floor, third door from the north staircase. Room's locked. Glenda will use the knock pattern to verify. What's the pattern? Novak said. She told him. He repeated it back exactly. She felt a brief, violent wave of gratitude for people who listen precisely. Go, she said. Where are you going? Marcus said. She was already moving back toward the passage entrance. Serena, Marcus said louder. Back inside, she said. Someone has to know where the detonators are. She heard him say something behind her. She didn't stop to hear what it was. She went back through the low door and let it close behind her and stood for a moment in the dark of the passage with the iron bar back in place and her phone the only light and the stone walls pressing in from both sides. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds. Then she started back the way she'd come, faster this time without 4 people to manage. The phone held ahead of her and her other hand touching the wall for guidance, moving through the dark on memory and the knowledge that 63 managed events had trained her body to know a building's geometry the way other people know their own apartments. Not by looking, but by accumulated passage. She had said detonators because it was the word that made sense. Alessio had positioned 11 people inside, an unknown number outside, had cut the main power, and had arranged this night with the specific care of someone who had been planning it for a long time and wasn't going to leave the ending to chance. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday. Tonight was Wednesday. Whatever he intended to do it in the window before the guests arrived, when the building contained a controlled number of people and the chaos could be managed rather than witnessed. She thought about what Damien had said. The whole event was arranged to put me in one place long enough to do it cleanly. Clean meant controlled. Controlled meant planned from the foundation. An estate like this, a 19th century building with original structure and 2 renovations. She thought about the renovation records she'd requested in August, the standard due diligence pull she did on every venue to understand structural limitations for load-bearing and access. The most recent renovation had been 18 months ago. Electrical and foundation work on the east and south wings. She had the renovation company's name in her phone, in her files. She'd never looked at it because she'd never needed to. She stopped in the passage, pulled up her email, found the venue documentation from August, opened the renovation summary. The contractor listed was a company called Hartfield Structural Solutions, the same name as the catering company whose credentials had been falsified. She stared at this for 2 seconds. Then she kept moving. When she came back through the utility door into the kitchen corridor, the building had changed in the 40 minutes she'd been in the passage. The kitchen was empty of staff. They'd been evacuated or had left on their own. She didn't know which, but the industrial surfaces were abandoned mid-preparation, a pot still sitting on a burner that had been turned off but was still warm. The corridor lights were still on emergency amber. From somewhere in the south wing she could hear movement, not running, but the steady, purposeful movement of people who are working through a plan. She needed the control room. Every estate at this level had one. The network hub for the security system, the power distribution controls, the CCTV, the communications infrastructure. She'd been shown it on Monday by the estate's facilities manager, a tired man named Holt, who had explained the system with the specific brevity of someone who didn't expect anyone to actually need to use it. It was on the ground floor of the East Wing. She'd walked past it 3 times this week without thinking about it. She moved through the kitchen, out the East Corridor, and stopped. 2 of Alessio's men were in the corridor 30 feet ahead, moving in her direction. They hadn't seen her yet. She pulled back around the corner and pressed flat against the wall, breathing through her nose, measuring the sound of their footsteps. Heavy, steady, not hurrying. And the distance between them and the corner, and the distance between her and the service closet 6 feet to her left. She made it to the closet, pulled the door shut to a crack, watched them pass through the gap. 2 men, dressed in the plain dark clothing that people who don't want to be noticed wear when they want to not be noticed, carrying the self-assurance of people who have been told the opposition is contained. She waited 4 seconds after they passed. Then she came out and went the other way, cut through the linen storage, came out on the far side of the East Corridor, and reached the control room door. It was locked. Standard key lock, the old-fashioned kind. She looked at the lock for a moment. Then she looked at the key hanging in it. The same key management philosophy that had given her the passage access on Monday had apparently been applied consistently throughout the estate. She was grateful for historical properties and their optimism about human nature. She unlocked the door and went inside. The control room was a repurposed estate office, about 12 feet square, walls lined with equipment racks and monitor screens, most of which were running on the emergency power and showing either static or the amber-tinted feeds from the backup cameras positioned around the property. The main power cut had taken the primary CCTV offline, but the backup cameras were still running, and she stood in front of the monitor bank for 30 seconds, reading what she could. South Garden, 4 figures positioned at intervals. North Garden. The wall was clear, which meant Marcus and Claudette and Novak had either made it to the entrance or were between the camera's angles. Main entrance, 2 vehicles blocking the gate, men standing at them. East Wing exterior, 2 figures, moving. And in the glass conservatory, the connecting gallery between the East and West Wings, the one she'd stood in that morning with lukewarm coffee and a tablet and a sightline problem that now seemed almost amusing in its smallness. There was a concentration of figures that the camera angle made difficult to count, but that she estimated at 5 or 6. The conservatory was the structural center of the estate. If you wanted to place something in a position that would affect the maximum amount of the building's load-bearing infrastructure, the conservatory's foundation connection points were where you would put it. She found the renovation documentation archive on the control room's secondary computer, the one running on backup power, and opened the structural files from 18 months ago. The renovation had included new conduit runs beneath the conservatory floor. The contractor had cited updated fire suppression requirements. She sat very still in front of the screen for a moment. There was no updated fire suppression system visible in the conservatory. She'd walked that space 3 times. She knew what fire suppression equipment looked like. The conduit runs had been installed, and then the space above them had been restored to its original appearance. Not fire suppression, something else. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. She went back out of the control room, locked it behind her by reflex, and moved toward the conservatory with the particular quality of movement that people have when they've crossed from urgency into necessity, and the difference between those 2 states becomes physiological. She was 12 feet from the conservatory entrance when she heard Damien's voice. It was coming from inside the conservatory. Not raised, controlled. The flat, controlled voice he used when he was managing something dangerous. She couldn't hear the words. She moved to the entrance and looked through. The conservatory and the emergency lighting was a strange and terrible kind of beautiful. The amber baseboards reflecting up through the iron-frame glass panels. The garden dark beyond, the long gallery space of it stretching east to west. There were 5 men in it that she could see. 3 of them were Alessio's, positioned at intervals with the body language of people who have been told to hold a position. 2 of them were Damien's security personnel, the ones who had been with him in the East Wing, and they were holding their positions at the West entrance with the specific stillness of people who are doing math about odds and not loving the results. Damien was in the center of this conservatory, 6 feet from Alessio. Alessio had something in his right hand. It was small, black, and rectangular in the amber light, and it took her 1 second to identify it and 1 more second to understand what it meant. A remote detonator, the kind with a single trigger. "You're not going to use that in here," Damien said. He said it with the certainty of a man who is not actually certain and is betting that the performance of certainty will buy him something. "I'm not going to use it right now," Alessio said, with the patient correction of someone adjusting a minor misunderstanding. "There's a difference." He held it loosely, at his side, with a casualness that was more frightening than if he'd been pointing it. "So I've spent 17 years building this moment, Damien. I'm not going to rush the end of it." "Whatever you have under this floor," Damien said. "Sufficient," Alessio said simply. "The east and south wings will collapse inward. The conservatory will go with them. The main house should remain standing. The structural separation is there if the charge placement is correct, and I assure you it is." He looked around the gallery with the expression of someone taking a long, satisfied look at something they've made. "The estate will survive. The organization will survive. The narrative will be that a rival family planted the device. I have the documentation prepared. It's quite convincing. The organization will consolidate around a clear leader, which will be me, and the period of transition will be unfortunate but brief." "Marcus is out of the building," Damien said. "I know," Alessio said. "Marcus was never the problem. Marcus is manageable. Marcus follows whoever appears to be an authority, and I have always been an authority where it counts." He paused. "The woman's son is still in the north wing. I assume she's gone to retrieve him. I have 2 people at the north entrance." Serena's chest seized. She made herself breathe. Novak was with them. Novak was capable. She had to believe that for the next 5 minutes. "The boy has nothing to do with this," Damien said. His voice stayed level. She could hear what it cost him. "The boy has everything to do with this," Alessio said, not unkindly. "He's the reason we're here. Not tonight specifically, but in the larger sense. The reason I had to move on a timeline I might otherwise have extended." He looked at Damien with something that was almost avuncular in its regret. "You found out he exists. I've been watching you since this morning, watching what happens to you when you look at him, and I knew by noon today that the window had closed. A man who knows he has a son he lost 9 years to betrayal. That man doesn't stay hungry. That man becomes something I can't use. So this is tonight because of me," Damien said, "because of what you saw this morning. Tonight is because I've been ready for 18 months, and you've given me the reason to stop waiting," Alessio said. "Yes." Damien looked at his uncle with the expression of someone who is seeing a thing clearly for the first time and finding that the clarity does not help as much as they had hoped it would. "You watched him in the park," Damien said. 8 years. You watched a child." "I wanted to understand what I was dealing with," Alessio said. "I needed to know whether the boy was going to be a factor or a detail. The answer, as it turns out, is that he's extraordinary, which made him a larger factor than I had originally." "Stop," Damien said. The word came out with a force that was not a shout, but that hit the conservatory's glass and iron acoustics and went everywhere. Alessio stopped. One of his 3 men shifted his weight. The 2 security personnel at the west entrance went very slightly more tense in the shoulders, which was the only movement available to people who were doing the math and not liking it. In the silence, Serena heard something. From above the conservatory, from the glass ceiling panels of the gallery, from the iron framework that held them, a sound. Small, singular. The specific sound of a roof access panel being lifted, somewhere in the middle of the gallery's length. She looked up. Through the glass panels, against the dark sky, there was a shape that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. Noah. Her son was on the roof of the conservatory. He was moving carefully, on hands and knees, which was the right instinct, distributing weight, staying low. And he was moving toward a specific point above the center of the gallery, and in his left hand he was carrying something small that caught the amber light from below and threw it back. Alessio's pocket watch. The one she hadn't known about until the receiving room. The one that belonged to the kind old man who had watched her son play in the park for 8 years. The one Noah had apparently taken sometime in the chaos of the last hour and was now carrying across a glass conservatory roof in the dark. Serena's blood went cold and burning at the same time. She looked at the conservatory entrance. She looked at the 5 men inside and the detonator in Alessio's hand, and the 12 feet of open floor between the entrance and the nearest of Alessio's personnel. She looked up again. Noah had reached a point directly above the center of the gallery. He stopped. He looked down through the glass. His face was pale and precise in the amber light from below, and he was looking directly at Alessio with the expression of a child who has been doing geology research and has learned, through the disciplined accumulation of information, exactly how to identify what he is looking at. Alessio had not looked up yet. Neither had his men. Damien had. She could see it from the entrance. The almost imperceptible lift of his chin, the single second of complete stillness that was different from all his other stillness, and then the return of his gaze to Alessio without betraying by a millimeter of his face what he had just seen. She had 3 seconds before someone else looked up. She moved through the conservatory entrance. She didn't run. Running created sound and peripheral motion and caused every trained person in the room to turn. She walked, fast, purposeful, the walk she used to cross a reception hall when a vendor was in the wrong position and needed to be redirected before anyone with authority noticed. The walk of someone with a specific destination and a legitimate reason to reach it. She covered 8 feet before one of Alessio's men turned. "Stop," he said. She didn't stop. She covered 3 more feet and reached the iron support column at the gallery's midpoint and put her hand on it, which was what she'd been moving toward, because the iron support column at the gallery's midpoint was directly below the access panel that Noah had come through. And if Noah was coming down, which he was going to do, she knew it, she knew her son. She was going to be directly below him. "I said stop," the man said, and he was moving toward her now. Alessio turned. He looked at Serena with the patient, slightly inconvenienced expression of someone whose arrangement has developed a minor complication. "Ms. Vale," he said, "I had hoped you would be further along toward the north exit by now." "I found something in the control room," she said. She was looking at him but watching, in her peripheral vision, the glass panel directly above her. The renovation documentation, the Hartfield contractor. She kept her voice even. Her heart was hitting her ribs with a regularity she was grateful for because it meant she was still functioning. "The conduit runs under the conservatory floor." Something moved in Alessio's expression. Very small. The recalculation of someone who did not expect this specific piece of information to be in this specific person's possession. "You know where the charges are," she said. "That's not a useful piece of information for you," he said. "There's a manual isolation switch in the renovation documentation," she said. "Emergency decoupling for the conduit system. It's required by code. The contractor would have had to install it." She watched his face. "Where is it?" He smiled. "That's not a negotiation I'm interested in having." "Damien," she said, without looking away from Alessio. Damien said from across the gallery, "East Foundation panel, behind the secondary junction box." He said it with the certainty of someone who had found it in the last 3 minutes while she was coming through the passage. Alessio's expression changed for the second time. The patience shifted. Something beneath it surfaced. "The control room computer had the schematics," Damien said. "Reyes found them 20 minutes ago." He looked at his uncle with the directness of someone who has been patient long enough. "You built a failsafe into the system. You always build failsafes. It's the most consistent thing about you." "Knowing where it is," Alessio said, "and reaching it are 2 different problems." He raised the detonator slightly. Not pointing it, just making its presence unambiguous. Above the conservatory, through the glass panels, Noah had not moved. He was still on hands and knees above the center of the gallery. He was watching. He was 8 years old, and he was watching with the focused, unblinking attention of someone who reads ahead in the book and has already done the math. In his left hand, the pocket watch caught the light and held it. Alessio's eyes went up. The moment his gaze found the glass panel above, Damien moved. He crossed the 6 feet between them in less than 2 seconds. Not a tackle, not a strike, but a controlled collision aimed at one specific thing, which was the hand holding the detonator. Alessio turned back, and the detonator came up, and Damien's hands closed on Alessio's wrist at the same moment that one of Alessio's three men launched himself across the gallery floor. The man hit Damien from the left, and all three of them went down in a controlled, terrible collapse onto the conservatory's marble floor, and the detonator skidded. Serena didn't look at where it went. She looked at the glass panel above her. She said very clearly, "Noah, the column, now." He came through the access panel like he'd been waiting for exactly that instruction. He dropped to the iron support column and came down it with the specific, fearless competence of a child who has been climbing things his entire life, because his mother did not have the energy to prevent it after the 14th attempt. And she caught him at the bottom, her hands on his rib cage, and he was breathing hard and shaking slightly and clutching the pocket watch in his left hand. "Mom," he said, and his voice was higher than usual by approximately 1 register. "I have you," she said. On the conservatory floor, Damien and the man were in a struggle that was not elegant or cinematic. It was two people trying to control space and leverage on a hard surface, making the sounds people make when they are exerting everything they have. The second of Alessio's men was moving toward them. The 2 security personnel at the west entrance were already in motion. Alessio was on his feet. He was 4 feet from where the detonator had landed. His eyes were on it. "Noah," Serena said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady. "Run to the west entrance. Don't stop. Don't look back." "Mom, now," she said. The word came out with a quality that was not a shout and not a request, and that he recognized immediately because she had used it exactly twice before in his life, and both times it had been important. He ran. Serena picked up the nearest object that was not bolted down, an iron candle stand, decorative, approximately 4 feet tall, weighing more than she'd expected, and she moved toward Alessio. He reached the detonator first. He turned with it in his hand and looked at her and looked at the iron stand in her hands and looked at his 3 men, 2 of whom were occupied and 1 of whom was moving toward her from the left. And he made the calculation that she was also making, and the calculation was the same for both of them. She threw the candle stand. Not at Alessio. At the iron framework of the nearest glass panel, 12 feet to his left, because the glass panels in a conservatory this age were single pane, and the iron framework was original and old. And when the stand hit it, it went through with a sound like the world reconsidering something, and the panel came down in a cascade of glass and iron that hit the marble floor and filled the conservatory with the sound of several hundred things breaking simultaneously. Every person in the room flinched. Every eye moved toward it, including Alessio's. Damien's right hand closed on the ankle of the man on top of him and turned, and the man went sideways, and Damien was up in one movement, and he crossed the floor in 3 strides and his fist connected with the side of the man's head as he came and the man went down. Damien was breathing hard. There was blood on his left cheekbone from where the marble floor had made contact. He was looking at Alessio with the expression of a man who has arrived at the end of something that took 17 years to get to. Alessio looked back at him. The detonator was still in his hand. His composure had not entirely left him. It was diminished, stripped of the patient warmth that had covered it all evening, but the structure beneath it was still there. The structure of someone who has always believed in his own inevitability. "You don't want to do this here," Alessio said. "The boy is in the building. If I trigger this—" "Noah is out of the conservatory," Damien said. "The west entrance." He didn't look away from his uncle's face. "And you're not going to trigger it." "You can't know that." "I know you," Damien said. "You've spent 17 years managing outcomes. You don't blow up a building while you're standing in it." He was still breathing hard. The blood on his cheek had reached his jaw. "You need an exit. You don't have one right now." Alessio looked around the conservatory, at the broken glass panel and the 3 men who were in various states of compromised, at the west entrance where Damien's security personnel now stood clear, at the east entrance where Serena stood with nothing in her hands. He looked back at Damien. "I watched your son in the park," he said quietly, "for 8 years. I want you to know, I never intended anything to happen to the boy. Whatever else I am, I want you to know that." "Give me the detonator," Damien said. Alessio looked at the device in his hand, at Damien, at Serena, at the broken glass on the marble floor still settling into its new configuration. "My brother trusted you," Damien said. His voice had changed. The control was still there, but it was thinner, and underneath it something older moved. something that had nothing to do with the organization or the empire or any of the architecture of power that had framed the last 17 years. My father trusted you. I trusted you. He paused. Give me the detonator. From somewhere in the north wing of the estate, muffled by distance and walls and the building's old bones, there was a sound. It was Noah's voice. She couldn't hear the words, but she heard the tone. And the tone was not fear. And she understood from it that he had reached the west entrance and found someone he recognized and was talking with the unstoppable momentum of an 8-year-old who has just had an experience he needs to describe immediately and in full detail. Alessio heard it too. She watched his face when he heard it. She watched something move through it that was not simple and not easy to name, and that told her more about the 18 months and the renovation and the 18-month countdown to this night than anything he'd said in the receiving room. He looked at Damien. He set the detonator on the marble floor between them. He straightened. He folded his hands in front of him. He looked at his nephew with the expression of a man who has just closed a door he has been standing in front of for a very long time. The isolation switch, Damien said. East foundation panel. Third conduit from the left, Alessio said. The red coupling. Damien looked at Reyes, who had appeared at the east entrance. Reyes was already moving before the look finished. Damien looked back at his uncle. He looked at him for a long time, long enough that the ambient sounds of the conservatory, the settling glass, the distant voice of his son, the building breathing, moved through the silence between them without filling it. Then Damien reached down and picked up the detonator from the floor. He turned it over once in his hand, feeling the weight of it, the specific plastic and metal weight of something built to end things. 17 years, he said. Alessio said nothing. You watched my son grow up, Damien said, from a distance, alone, while I didn't know he existed. The words came out very flat, flatter than anger, flatter than grief. The specific flatness of something that has gone so deep it has come out the other side of temperature. You watched that, and you arranged it, and you let it happen. Alessio stood very still. From the east end of the conservatory, Reyes's voice came through, steady and clear. Switch is isolated. The system is decoupled. The building, which had been holding its breath for 18 months, exhaled. Damien closed his hand around the detonator. He looked at his uncle across the amber-lit wreckage of the conservatory. The broken glass, the iron framework, the marble floor that had held all of this. And his face settled into something that was not forgiveness and not hatred, but the specific, irrevocable expression of a man who understands exactly what he has lost and has decided, in this moment, what he is going to do about it. The conservatory was quiet, in a way that old buildings get quiet after something violent has moved through them. Not peaceful, but emptied. The amber emergency lighting still ran along the baseboards, still turned everything the color of old photographs, still made the broken glass on the marble floor look like something that belonged in a museum, rather than the aftermath of a night that had cost considerably more than anyone had budgeted for. Alessio Vescari stood with his hands folded in front of him and did not try to run. Serena noticed that. She filed it away beside everything else she was filing away. The detonator in Damien's closed fist, the blood drying on his cheekbone, the distant sound of Noah's voice still carrying from the west wing, still talking, still describing whatever he had seen and done with the unstoppable momentum of someone who processes experience by narrating it. She had given him that, she thought. That specific quality of making sense of things by saying them out loud. She had watched him do it since he was 3, and she had never once considered that it might be his father's quality too, refracted through her example, expressed in his own particular frequency. Reyes came back through the east entrance. His face said what his voice didn't need to. The isolation was complete. Whatever Alessio had spent 18 months installing beneath the conservatory floor was now a collection of inert components that would require a great deal of professional attention to remove safely and an even greater deal of professional attention to explain to the relevant authorities. How many of your people are still unaccounted for? Damien said to Alessio. 3, Alessio said. Where? A pause. Long enough that it wasn't quite compliance and wasn't quite refusal. Then, South Garden. They have instructions to hold position until they hear from me. Call them off, Damien said. Alessio looked at his nephew for a moment with an expression that Serena had to look at for several seconds before she understood what it was. It was not defiance. It was not calculation. It was something closer to a man looking at the thing he built and accepting, for the first time with complete clarity, that the thing he built was not what he had believed it to be. The recognition had a quality of genuine weight to it. Not remorse, exactly. Alessio Vescari did not appear to be a man who arrived easily at remorse, but something adjacent to it. The specific heaviness of a person confronting the distance between what they intended and what they made. He took his phone from his jacket pocket. He made the call. 45 seconds, 4 words, and it was done. Damien looked at Reyes. Reyes took Alessio by the arm, not roughly, and walked him toward the east entrance. Alessio went without resistance. At the doorway, he stopped once and looked back at Damien across the amber-lit gallery, across the broken glass and the iron framework and the marriage of all the damage, structural and otherwise, that the night had produced. "Your father," Alessio said, "would have done the same thing I did. I want you to know that." Damien said nothing. "He built this organization on the same principles," Alessio said. "Fear and control and the management of sentiment. Love was a liability in his calculation as much as mine." "My father is not here," Damien said, "and you're not him." Alessio looked at him for one more second. Then he let Reyes walk him out. The conservatory was silent. Serena became aware that she was cold. It had been building for the last hour. The passage, the night air in the north garden, the glass panels she'd broken. And now that the immediate demand on her nervous system had lifted slightly, her body was reporting the temperature with considerable interest. She was also aware that her hands were shaking. Not violently, not dramatically, just the fine, persistent tremor of muscles that had been held at high tension for too long and were now releasing in increments whether she asked them to or not. Damien was still standing where he'd been standing when Alessio left. He was looking at the detonator in his hand. He turned it over once. Then he set it carefully on the marble floor near the wall, with the specific deliberateness of someone putting down something they never want to touch again. He looked up and found her. 12 feet between them. The same 12 feet as the ballroom that morning, which had been approximately 40 years ago in terms of what had happened between that moment and this one. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "Your hands are shaking." "I know," she said. "Give it a minute." He walked toward her. Not fast. Not with any particular destination beyond the obvious one, which was that she was standing at the east end of the conservatory and he was at the west end, and 12 feet was too much distance given everything. He stopped when he reached her, close. The way he'd stood close in the north wing corridor when the geometry of the room had required him to recalculate where the important things were. She could see the damage on his face clearly now. The split skin on his cheekbone, the bruising already coming up along his jaw, the specific exhaustion that lives deeper than tired and closer to the bone. She put her hand up to his face before she'd decided to, just her palm, against his jaw, below the cut, feeling the warmth of it, the reality of it. He closed his eyes for a moment. One moment, in the amber light, in the broken conservatory, with the buildings settling around them and the night still pressing cold through the missing glass panel, and everything that had happened between that morning and this standing in the room with them, like furniture. Then his eyes opened. "Where is he?" said. "West entrance," she said, "with Novak, talking." Something moved through Damien's face. She watched it, the specific private movement of a person adjusting to a thing they haven't had long enough to adjust to. "Is he? He's fine," she said. "He was on the conservatory roof." Damien looked at her. "He had Alessio's pocket watch," she said. "I don't know when he took it or how, but he had it." Damien was quiet for a moment. "He followed us," he said. "He found the passage," she said. "He must have heard me come back through it. He's 8 years old and he reads ahead in the book and he—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together for a second. "He has your instinct for needing to see things for himself." Damien absorbed this. He absorbed it the way he absorbed most things, quietly, thoroughly, without showing the full dimensions of what it cost him. But she had known him for a long time, even with the 9 years in the middle, and she could see the dimensions if she looked. "We should go find him," she said. "Yes," he said. He didn't move yet. Neither did she. "Serena," he said. "I know," she said. "I need to say it." "I know," she said again. "But not here. Not tonight." There's too much tonight already. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, the way he used to nod when he was accepting terms he didn't entirely agree with but understood the necessity of. Not tonight, he said. They walked out of the conservatory together. Noah was at the west entrance with Novak and Glenda, who had apparently decided that a locked door was insufficient given the sound she'd heard and had opened it the moment Novak arrived with the knock pattern, because Glenda had the practical, unsentimental judgment of a retired schoolteacher who has managed 30 years of genuine emergencies and knows the difference between rules and sense. She had Noah's jacket in her hands and was trying to put it on him while he talked, which was a process he was resisting not because he was cold, but because stopping to put arms and sleeves would require a pause in the narration. He saw Damien first. Not Serena. Damien, which was interesting and which she filed away. He stopped talking. He looked at Damien with the direct, comprehensive look that he'd used that morning in the ballroom. The taking inventory look. The child's uncomplicated assessment of a thing he has not yet decided what to call. Damien stopped walking when Noah looked at him. He stood very still. "You're the man from the ballroom," Noah said. "Yes," Damien said. "And from the conservatory roof," Noah said. "I saw you from up there." "I saw you too," Damien said. Noah considered this. He looked at the cut on Damien's cheek with the frank attention of someone who has been taken to the emergency room twice and understands that injuries require assessment. "That needs cleaning," he said. "The cut." "Probably," Damien said. "My mom has antiseptic in her kit," Noah said. "She always has antiseptic. She's very prepared." He said this with the slight exasperation and deep pride that children have when describing their parents' consistent habits. Damien looked at Serena. She looked back at him. She felt her eyes doing something she had been holding them back from doing for approximately 14 hours. And she let them, just slightly, just enough. "She is," Damien said, "very prepared." Noah looked between them. I was 8 years old, and he had been on a conservatory roof 40 minutes ago, and he had, apparently, taken a pocket watch from a man who turned out to be the architect of 9 years of damage, and he was still processing all of it. She could see it in the way he held himself, the slight, elevated quality of his stillness, the careful attention he was paying to everything around him. But he was also 8 years old, and 8-year-olds have a remarkable capacity for locating the pragmatic need within any situation. "Are we going home?" he asked Serena. She looked at the building around them, at the north wing entrance, at the estate's old stones, at the garden just visible through the side door where the night was beginning, very slowly, to shift from deep black toward the first gray suggestion of morning. "Not yet," she said. "There are things that have to happen first." "Okay," he said. He looked at Damien again. "You should probably come with us, while she does the antiseptic," Damien said very carefully. "Okay." The things that had to happen first took 3 weeks. The authorities arrived before dawn. Reyes had made calls that Serena was not present for and did not ask about in detail, because there are categories of professional action that she understood to exist without needing a complete accounting of their mechanics. What she knew was that by 4 a.m. there were vehicles at the Hartwell estate gate that belonged to people with jurisdiction and documentation, and by 6 a.m. there were people in protective gear moving through the conservatory with equipment that was designed for the specific problem of removing things from beneath old floors safely. Alessio Vescari was taken from the estate in the back of a vehicle that was not a limousine. He went without additional incident. He did not look back at the building. Marcus sat with Claudette in the north parlor while the estate filled with people who were not wedding guests, and he held her hand and spoke to her in a voice too low for anyone else to hear, and she spoke back. And the conversation they were having was clearly longer and more complicated than one night and one parlor could fully contain, but they were having it, which was something. Serena coordinated the evacuation of the remaining catering and venue staff with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has spent a decade managing the movement of people through spaces. She did it because it needed to be done, and because doing something concrete was the only thing she had ever found that reliably held her together when the alternative was falling apart in a way that wasn't useful to anyone. Priya found her at 5 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of someone who had too many questions to begin asking any of them. "The wedding," Priya said. "Is postponed," Serena said. "Obviously," Priya said. "The vendors—" "I'll handle it tomorrow," Serena said. "Tonight is tonight." Tomorrow is when we deal with tomorrow. Priya handed her a coffee. She looked at Serena for a moment with the particular attention of someone who has worked alongside a person long enough to read the things they don't say. Then she said, "The man with the cut on his face. He's been within 30 feet of you since 4 a.m. Serena drank her coffee. "That's all," Priya said. "Just noting it." "Noted," Serena said. Noah fell asleep at 5:30 on the north parlor sofa with his geology book open on his chest and the pocket watch, which had been taken by the authorities and returned to him with some bemusement as a piece of evidence he had apparently been in legal possession of during the acquisition, on the cushion beside him. Glenda sat in the chair nearby with the unshakable equanimity of a woman who has seen children through considerably more disruption than this, and knows that sleep, when it comes, is what matters. Damien stood in the doorway of the north parlor and watched his son sleep for a period of time that Serena didn't measure. She stood beside him and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that wasn't inadequate. After a while, he reached up and touched the doorframe, just briefly, with 2 fingers, not gripping it, just touching it, the way you touch something to confirm it's real. Then he turned and walked back toward the east wing to speak to the investigators, because that was the next thing that needed to happen. The 3 weeks that followed were the most legally complex period of Serena's professional life, and the most emotionally complex period of her personal one, and the 2 categories were not entirely separate, which made the navigation of both simultaneously an exercise in the kind of sustained attention that she had not previously known she was capable of. The Vescry organization's structure, when the documentation Damien turned over was fully analyzed, proved to be a thing of considerable architectural complexity. 17 years of Alessio's parallel management had created a shadow operation running beneath the legitimate one: financial instruments, subcontracted operations, influence networks, that had been invisible from inside the primary organization because it had been designed specifically to be invisible from that vantage point. The federal investigators who reviewed it described it, in a briefing that Serena was not supposed to have access to, but whose summary Damien shared with her on a Wednesday evening at the kitchen table of the hotel suite they'd been provided as temporary housing, as one of the more sophisticated long-term internal fraud operations they had documented. Damien spent those 3 weeks in rooms with lawyers and investigators and compliance officers, providing documentation and testimony with a comprehensiveness that, she understood from what he told her, went considerably beyond what was legally required of him. He was choosing the degree of disclosure. He was choosing it deliberately, systematically, accepting the consequences that came with it as the price of something he had decided was worth paying. The legitimate businesses, she said, on the 3rd Wednesday, at the kitchen table with the files spread between them. The real estate holding company, the construction subsidiaries. Clean, he said. Always clean. My father kept those separate on principle. I continued the principle without knowing it was because the other side needed to remain credible. He looked at the files. The lawyers say the legitimate holdings are substantial enough to survive restructuring. What does restructuring mean? She said. It means I spend the next 18 months working with a compliance monitor and a federal oversight team to document the full separation of the legitimate operations from everything Alessio ran underneath them. He looked at her. It means I'm not going anywhere for a while. She absorbed this. Noah's school is in Chicago, she said. I know, he said. He starts 3rd grade in 3 weeks, she said. He needs consistency. He's had a lot of movement in his life already. I know, he said again. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to change anything yet. I'm not asking for anything right now. I want you to understand that. She looked at him. The kitchen table between them had paperwork on it and 2 cups of tea that had gone cold, and the ordinary domestic props of a situation that was not ordinary and had not been ordinary since a Tuesday morning in September, when a man in a cream linen suit had sat across from her and set an envelope on a white tablecloth and told her to run. I know you're not asking, she said. But, he said. But Noah asked me last night why you're always at dinner, she said. He asked if you were going to keep being at dinner. Damien was quiet. I told him I didn't know, she said. He said he thought it would be good if you did. She looked at the table. He said you explain things without making him feel stupid for not already knowing them. That's a high compliment from him. He has strong opinions about how explanations are delivered. Damien's face did the thing it kept doing. the thing she had watched it do repeatedly over the last 3 weeks. This movement of something private and enormous moving just beneath the surface of his expression, visible only because she had known his face for a long time and knew where to look. He was not a person who cried easily or perhaps at all, but she had begun to think that the thing she kept seeing was the near equivalent of it, the pressure of something that had no other outlet. "I should have found you," he said, 9 years ago. "I should have tried harder." "You tried for 2 years," she said. "It wasn't enough." "No," she said, "it wasn't. But I also should not have believed that letter without—" She stopped. She had been over this particular stretch of ground many times in the last 3 weeks. Internally and in 2 conversations with a therapist she'd made an appointment with on the second Monday, because she was a person who had learned to ask for help even when the help was inadequate. We both made decisions based on false information provided by someone who needed those decisions to go in a specific direction. I've been trying to decide how much of the last 9 years is something to be angry about and how much of it is something that just happened. "What have you decided?" he said. "That it's both," she said, "at the same time, and that being angry about it doesn't actually get Noah his 9 years back." Damien looked at her. "No," he said. "So," she said. "So," he said. The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere in the suite, she could hear the television that Noah had been watching before he fell asleep, still running, something about the formation of sedimentary layers, the calm narrating voice of a documentary that had moved on without its audience. "I want to be at dinner," Damien said. "I want to be at the school events, and the Saturday mornings, and the emergency room if there's ever another emergency room. I want to know what he thinks about breakfast cereal." He stopped. "I want to know you again. Both of you. I want—" He stopped again. He looked at the table. "I'm aware that wanting something is not an argument for why you should give it to me." "No," she said. "It's not." "I know." "But," she said. He looked up. "I've been making decisions alone for 9 years," she said. "Every single one. I made them, and I carried them, and I was good at it." She looked at him directly. "I don't want to make them alone anymore. I'm not saying that because of tonight or because of what happened at the estate. I'm saying it because I've known it for longer than I've admitted it." She paused. "I don't know what that means yet, what shape it takes. I don't think either of us should decide that in 3 weeks in a hotel suite with federal compliance monitors in the next room." "No," he said. Something in his face had changed. Something had gone from under pressure to something else. Not relief, which was too simple, but the quality of a person who has been braced for a particular kind of answer and has received a different one. "But I'm not running," she said. I want you to know that. Whatever we figure out, I'm not running." He held her gaze. The kitchen light was ordinary and slightly too bright, and the files were spread between them, and the tea was cold and none of it was cinematic, and all of it was real. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. The autumn came in with the specific efficiency of seasons that don't announce themselves. One week, the light had a particular quality, and the next week it had a different one. And the trees in the park where Noah played on Saturday mornings began to do what trees do, slowly, and then all at once, letting go of things they'd been holding all summer. Marcus's wedding happened in November. Not at the Hartwell estate. That property was in a legal complexity that would take considerably longer than 2 months to resolve, but at a small venue outside the city, 30 people, a ceremony that lasted 18 minutes because Claudette had strong opinions about the appropriate length of ceremonies, and Marcus had learned over the last months that Claudette's opinions on most things were worth listening to. Serena coordinated it, not because Marcus had asked her to, but because she'd offered, and because the offering had been important to her in a way she understood without needing to explain. It was 64 events without crying. She got through 63 minutes of the 64th before Marcus said something to Claudette at the altar that she didn't quite catch, and Claudette laughed. A real laugh, sudden and unguarded and completely at odds with the formal setting. And something in Serena's chest gave way in a manner that was apparently not entirely within her control. She dealt with it in the back corridor for approximately 90 seconds. Then she went back to work. Noah's third-grade teacher sent home a note in October that said he had given an unsolicited presentation to his class about the geological history of the Hudson Valley and had been difficult to stop once started. The teacher's note managed to be both a gentle complaint and a clear statement of admiration, which Serena thought demonstrated considerable skill. She put the note on the refrigerator. Damien saw it there on a Thursday evening when he came to dinner. He stood in front of the refrigerator and read it twice. He didn't say anything about it, but she saw him touch the edge of the paper with one finger before he turned away, the same way he'd touched the doorframe of the north parlor at 5 a.m. in the Hartwell estate while Noah slept. The conversations between Damien and Noah happened gradually, the way real things happen, not in a single dramatic disclosure, but in accumulated ordinary time. Dinners and Saturday park visits, and one memorable Sunday when Noah decided Damien needed to be educated on the full taxonomy of igneous rock and produced 17 library books from his backpack to support the curriculum. Damien sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours with the books spread between them and asked questions with the patient-focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested, and Noah answered them with the specific pleasure of a child who has found someone willing to take their obsessions seriously. She watched this from the kitchen doorway one afternoon in late October and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for 9 years. Not fixed, that wasn't the right word, because the 9 years were still there and would always be there. A permanent feature of the landscape that you learn to navigate around rather than through, but settled. The way ground settles after a long winter, finding its new level, accepting the shape of what it is now. The conversation about what Damien was to Noah happened on a Saturday in late November, in the park, sitting on the bench they'd made into a consistent point of reference over 2 months of weekly visits. It was Noah who initiated it, because Noah had been thinking about it for weeks in the way he thought about things. Systematically, working through the available information until he arrived at a position he could state clearly. "Are you my dad?" Noah said, not looking up from the rock he was examining. He had found it near the path and believed it to be a piece of serpentinite, which would make it the most interesting thing he'd found in this park. Damien was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. Noah turned the rock over. "I figured," he said. "How?" Damien said. "The eyes," Noah said. He looked up briefly, directly at Damien, making the comparison with the frank efficiency of an 8-year-old conducting a visual analysis. "And you explain things the same way I explain things. Like you already know where the explanation is going and you're just deciding how fast to get there." Damien looked at his son. The park around them was doing what November parks do. Leaves largely down, the trees bare and honest, the light coming through at the low angle of the late season. "I didn't know of you," Damien said, "for a long time. I want you to know that." Noah considered this. He set the rock in his lap. "Mom told me," he said. "Kind of. She said it was complicated." "It was," Damien said. "Is it still complicated?" Noah said. "Less than it was," Damien said. "It's getting less complicated." Noah looked at the rock. "Okay," he said, with the particular 8-year-old pragmatism that Serena had always found simultaneously humbling and extraordinary. The capacity to receive a large piece of information and locate within it what is actionable and useful and set aside the rest for later. "Do you know anything about serpentinite?" Damien looked at the rock. "Not much," he said. "Teach me." Noah began to talk. Serena sat on the far end of the bench and let the sun hit her face, what there was of it this late in the year, and listened to her son explain the geological history of serpentinite to a man who was listening to him with both his full attention and the specific quality she had long since identified as the most accurate external evidence she'd ever seen of what Damien Viscari actually was underneath everything he had spent his life building over it. A person who, when something mattered, made it matter completely. She thought about the Tuesday morning in September that had started all of this. The manila envelope, the cream linen suit, the 12 feet of marble floor between her and someone she had spent 9 years trying to bury at a survivable depth. She thought about Noah in this park for 8 years with someone watching from a distance she had never seen, and she let herself be angry about that for a moment in the clear November light, because the anger was real and true and deserved its moment, even now, even here, even with everything that had grown up around it and through it and in spite of it. Then she let it go. Not because it wasn't real, but because she was tired of carrying things that weren't going to help her move forward, and forward was the only direction available to anyone. The small wedding happened on a Sunday in late autumn, at a lakeside property north of the city that Serena had found through a venue contact, and that was, by any measurable standard, the least elaborate event she had ever coordinated in her professional life. 12 guests. No floral arch. No lighting rig. No marble floor. No chandeliers with dimmer settings that required negotiation. Just a lake, and the trees around it and the sky above it doing what November skies do, which is exist with a gray honesty that Serena had always privately preferred to the performed perfection of better weather. Noah stood between them in a suit that he had agreed to wear only after being promised a geology museum visit the following weekend. He had his hands in both of theirs, and he was standing with the particular straight-backed seriousness of someone who understands that the occasion requires a specific quality of attention, even if he was also clearly tracking the flight path of a bird over the water with about 20% of his focus. The person conducting the ceremony said what people say at ceremonies, and Damien looked at Serena across the 12 inches of cold November air between them with an expression she did not try to decode or categorize or file away. She just looked at it. She let herself look at it fully, the way you look at something when you have finally stopped being afraid that looking too directly will make it go away. He slipped the ring onto her finger. His hands were warm, which they always were, which was something she had known about him for a long time and had carried without acknowledging for 9 years like a small piece of evidence she'd never known what to do with. "Okay," Noah said quietly, between them, watching the bird land on the water. Damien looked down at him. Serena looked down at him. "Serpentinite," Noah said, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing the rock from the park. He held it up toward the light over the water, turning it slowly, watching the way the surface caught and released it. It starts as one thing, and then pressure and heat change it into something completely different. He turned it over in his fingers with the careful attention he gave to everything that interested him. "But the original minerals are still in there. You can still see them if you know what you're looking for." He put it back in his pocket. He looked at the lake. He kept hold of both of their hands. The water was very still. The trees held their bare branches in the cold air with the particular patience of things that have been through winters before, and understand, without needing to be told, that what appears to be an ending is almost always something else.